She didn't know the bullet had her name on it, not until the forest exploded with gunfire and her husband's hands were slick with her blood. This is the story of Leora Vance, a woman sold like cargo into a marriage built on desperation, who became the only thing standing between a crumbling empire and total ruin. What started as a cold transaction in a rain-soaked chapel became a battle for survival that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about power, loyalty, and what it means to truly see another person. If you stay with me until the end, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets, turning the chapel steps into a river of gray. Leora stood at the bottom, her dress already soaked through, staring up at the arched doorway like it was the mouth of something that would swallow her whole. "Move," her uncle said behind her. His voice had that edge it always got when he was about to lose money. "You're making us look bad." She didn't move. Not yet. She let herself have one more second of being nobody's wife, nobody's asset, just a woman standing in the rain with her father's ghost whispering in her ear. Never let them see you're afraid. Fear's the first thing they'll use against you. Her father had been dead 6 months. The empire he'd built, shipping routes that stretched across 3 continents, warehouses in every major port, connections that could make or break a merchant house overnight, had become her uncle's the moment they lowered the casket into the ground. And her uncle, brilliant at spending other people's money and terrible at making his own decisions, had found a use for her that didn't involve actually listening to anything she had to say. He'd sold her to a duke. Not in those words, of course. The contract used terms like alliance and mutual benefit and the joining of 2 great houses. But Leora had grown up reading shipping manifests and contract clauses, learning to spot the lie hiding in the language. She knew what this was. Darian Crow needed her father's fortune to save his failing estate. Her uncle needed the legitimacy that came with a title. And she was the currency that made the deal work. "Leora." Her uncle's hand closed around her elbow, tight enough to leave marks. "Don't embarrass me." She climbed the steps. Inside, the chapel was cold and dim, candles struggling against the draft that swept through every time the door opened. There weren't many people. A handful of witnesses required by law, her uncle's business associates who'd come to make sure the deal actually went through, and a small cluster of people she assumed belonged to Darian's household. They looked at her the way you'd look at a horse at auction, assessing, calculating, already deciding if she was worth what had been paid. Darian was waiting at the altar. She'd seen a portrait of him once, in her uncle's study. It had made him look noble, commanding, the kind of man who belonged in history books. The reality was less impressive. He was tall, she'd give him that, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples and a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't set in lines of permanent irritation. He looked like a man who'd been losing a war for a long time and was too proud to admit it. He didn't look at her as she approached. His eyes were fixed somewhere over her shoulder, like she was already boring him. The ceremony was brief. The officiant spoke the required words in a monotone that suggested he had done this too many times to care about the meaning anymore. Leora said, "I do," because that's what was written in the contract. Darian said it because apparently even financial desperation had its rituals. When the officiant told him to kiss his bride, Darian turned to her for the first time. His eyes were gray, cold as the rain outside. He leaned in, pressed his lips to hers for exactly as long as tradition demanded, and pulled back without a word. Then it was done. "Congratulations," her uncle said, already moving toward the door. "I'll have the papers sent over this week." He didn't even stay for the meal. The estate was 3 hours north by carriage, and Darian spent every minute of it reading documents and making notes in margins like she wasn't even there. Leora watched the countryside roll past the window, green hills giving way to harder terrain, stone walls and bare fields that looked like they were barely holding on. "Is it always this quiet?" she asked finally. He glanced up, seemingly surprised she could speak. "What?" "The land. Does it always look like this?" "It's been a difficult few years." He went back to his papers. "We've had some setbacks." Setbacks. That was one way to describe what she'd learned from digging through the reports her uncle had been too careless to hide. Darian's estate was hemorrhaging money. 3 bad harvests, 2 failed investments, and a shipping route that had collapsed when pirates made the northern passage too dangerous to insure. He was drowning in debt, mortgaged to creditors who were starting to circle like sharks. And now he had her father's fortune. Or at least, he thought he did. What he actually had was her. The house appeared as they rounded a curve, a sprawling stone structure that had probably been impressive a century ago, but now looked tired, like it was holding itself together through sheer stubbornness. Some of the windows were dark. Others had shutters hanging at odd angles. The gardens were overgrown, wild roses choking out everything else. Darian didn't comment on it. He just climbed out of the carriage, nodded to someone Leora couldn't see, and walked toward the entrance without waiting to see if she followed. A woman was waiting inside, older, with steel gray hair and a face that suggested she'd stopped being impressed by anything around 1850. "Mrs. Hallis," Darian said, "this is my wife. Show her to her rooms." Not our rooms. Her rooms. Mrs. Hallis looked Leora up and down with the same assessing gaze she'd gotten at the chapel. "This way." They climbed 2 flights of stairs, walked down a corridor where portraits of dead crows stared down with varying degrees of disapproval, and stopped at a door near the far end. "Your quarters," Mrs. Hallis said. She pushed the door open to reveal a bedroom that was clean, functional, and completely impersonal. "Dinner is at 7. His Grace dresses formally." "Where are his rooms?" Leora asked. Mrs. Hallis's expression didn't change. "The other wing." She left before Leora could ask anything else. Leora stood in the doorway, looking at the space that was supposed to be hers. A bed with white linens, a wardrobe, a desk by the window. Everything neat, everything in its place, everything hollow as a stage set. She thought about her father's house, about the study where he'd taught her to read contracts by lamplight, about the kitchen where the cook would let her taste the spices that came from ships with names she'd memorized before she could write, about the controlled chaos of a life built on movement and risk, and the constant dance of buying, selling, negotiating, surviving. This place was a tomb. She unpacked her trunk slowly, hanging dresses she'd never wanted in a wardrobe that was too big for what she owned. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, was her father's ledger, the one he'd kept hidden, the one that showed the real structure of his network, the routes no one else knew about, the contacts who owed favors, the deals that existed only in handshakes and trust. Her uncle had never found it. He'd been too busy counting the obvious money to look for the real power. Leora put it in the desk drawer and locked it. Dinner was exactly as miserable as she'd expected. The dining room was enormous, designed for banquets and important gatherings, now occupied by exactly 2 people sitting at opposite ends of a table that could seat 20. Darian had changed into formal wear, black coat, perfectly knotted tie, the costume of a man pretending everything was fine. Leora had worn a simple dress. It felt like rebellion. The first course arrived in silence, some kind of soup that tasted like it had been made with optimism and very little meat. Leora ate it because she was hungry, not because it was good. "Tomorrow," Darian said, not looking up from his plate, "I'll be reviewing the estate accounts. You're welcome to tour the grounds if you'd like." "I'd rather see the accounts." Now he looked up. "Excuse me?" "The accounts," Leora said. "I'd like to see them." His expression shifted through several emotions before landing on something between amusement and condescension. "That won't be necessary. I have managers for that sort of thing." "How are they doing?" "I beg your pardon?" "Your managers." She met his eyes, refusing to look away. "How are they doing?" "With the accounts." Darian set down his spoon very carefully. "Mrs. Crow, I appreciate your interest, but financial management is complex. It requires experience and—" "I grew up in a shipping house," Leora said. "I was reading trade manifests before I could read novels. I know how to balance a ledger, track inventory, and spot when someone's cooking the books. So I'll ask again, how are your managers doing?" The silence that followed had weight to it. "The estate's finances," Darian said slowly, "are not your concern. I'm your wife. Everything about this estate is my concern. You're my wife in name." His voice had gone cold. "What you are in practice is a financial arrangement that allows me to stabilize my holdings and secure the future of this land. I don't require your input on how I manage that arrangement." Leora felt something sharp and hot flare in her chest. She recognized it, her father's anger, the kind that burned clean and didn't waste energy on shouting. "You mean my father's money allows you to stabilize your holdings," she said quietly. "Let's at least be honest about what I am. I'm not your wife. I'm your bailout." Darian stood. "I think we understand each other. Good evening." He left. The soup grew cold. Leora sat alone in the enormous dining room and thought about all the ways a man could drown without ever admitting he couldn't swim. The next 3 weeks passed in a careful dance of avoidance. Darian kept to his study and his meetings with managers who all seemed to be telling him different versions of everything's fine, while the estate continued its slow collapse. Leora explored the grounds, mapped the house, and started learning the rhythms of a place that was dying so gradually that no one seemed to notice. She talked to the servants when they'd let her. Mrs. Hallis remained professionally distant, but the younger staff were easier. A maid named Petra, who whispered about unpaid wages. A stable hand named James, who mentioned that 3 of the horses had been sold last month, quietly, without announcement. A cook named Mrs. Davies, who apologized for the simple meals and admitted the supplier had doubled his prices. Leora listened to all of it, filing details away like her father had taught her. She also wrote letters. Carefully worded, sent through channels her uncle wouldn't think to watch. Old contacts of her father's, people who'd respected him and might be willing to talk to his daughter. She wasn't asking for help yet, just exploring options. She was in the garden, reading a response to one of those letters, when she heard shouting from the house. The study door was open. Darian's voice carried down the hall, tight with fury. "Told you to handle this. That's what I pay you for. Your Grace, the situation has deteriorated. I don't want excuses, Garrett. I want solutions." Leora moved closer, staying out of sight. Through the gap in the door, she could see Darian and an older man in merchant's clothes. The man, Garrett, held a ledger like it was a shield. "The northern route is completely compromised," Garrett said. "Every ship we've sent in the last 4 months has either been seized by pirates or forced to take the long way around. The insurance companies won't cover us anymore. We're losing thousands per voyage." "Then we use a different route." There is no different route. Not for the kind of cargo we're moving. The southern passage adds 3 weeks and doubles the cost. The eastern corridor requires permits we can't afford. Your Grace, we're trapped." Darian slammed his hand on the desk. "Then we're ruined." "Not necessarily." Garrett hesitated. "There are alternative arrangements, less legitimate operations that still run the northern passage. They charge premium rates, but smugglers." Darian's voice was flat. "You want me to hire smugglers. I want you to survive." Leora pulled back before they could see her. Her mind was already working, turning over the problem like her father had taught her. Find the gaps, find the leverage, find the angle no one else is seeing. She knew that route. Her father had used it for years, back when it was still safe. More than that, she knew the people who'd made it unsafe. Or rather, she knew someone who knew them. A merchant named Callan, who operated in the gray spaces between legal and criminal, who'd been at her father's funeral and told her if she ever needed anything. But Darian wouldn't listen. He'd made that clear. As far as he was concerned, she was decorative furniture that came with a dowry. She went back to her room, pulled out her father's hidden ledger, and started making plans. 2 days later, a maid found Leora in the library. "Mrs. Crow? His Grace requests your presence in the study." Leora marked her place in the shipping manual she'd been reading. "Did he say why?" "No, ma'am." She went, expecting another cold dismissal. Instead, she found Darian standing by the window, staring out at the grounds with an expression that looked almost human. "Close the door," he said. She did. "I need to ask you something." He didn't turn around. "Your father's network. The one your uncle inherited. How much of it do you actually understand?" Leora chose her words carefully. "More than my uncle does." "That's not what I asked." "I understand all of it," she said. "Every route, every contact, every deal. My father didn't believe in keeping his daughter in the dark." Now Darian turned. He looked tired in a way that clothes and posture couldn't hide. "Could you get a message to someone in the northern ports? Someone who might have..." Connections to the groups operating in the compromised waters? The pirates. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Leora moved to the desk, where Garrett's ledgers were spread out like casualties. You're losing money on every shipment because you can't use the northern route safely. The alternatives are too slow or too expensive. You need someone who can either eliminate the threat or negotiate passage through it. Darian's jaw tightened. Your uncle assured me he would maintain your father's contacts. My uncle is an idiot who couldn't negotiate his way out of a paper bag. He inherited a network he doesn't understand and connections he can't maintain. Half those contacts probably don't even know my father is dead. And you could reach them. It wasn't a question, but Leora treated it like one anyway. Yes. Darian studied her for a long moment. She could see him doing the math, weighing the cost of admitting he needed her against the cost of continued failure. What would you need? He asked finally. Access to your shipping records. Complete access. I need to see exactly what you're moving, when, and through which routes. I need to know who your suppliers are, who your buyers are, and where the money's actually going. Absolutely not. Then you're on your own. She turned to leave. Wait. Darian's voice stopped her at the door. Why? Why would you help me? I've given you no reason to care whether this estate survives. Leora looked back at him. You're right, you haven't. But this estate isn't just you. It's the people who work here, who depend on the wages you're barely paying, who'll starve if this place collapses. And despite what you seem to think, I'm not just your financial arrangement. I'm stuck here too. If you go down, I go down with you. She paused. Besides, she added, I'm really tired of eating terrible soup. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Darian's face. It died quickly. The records are yours, he said. But Leora, he caught himself, seemed surprised he'd used her name. If this goes wrong, if whatever you're planning puts this estate at greater risk, it won't. You can't promise that. No, Leora agreed, but I can promise I know what I'm doing, which is more than you can say right now. He flinched. She'd landed that one cleanly. I'll have Garrett bring everything to the library, Darian said quietly. Start tomorrow. Leora nodded and left before he could change his mind. That night she wrote 3 letters. One to Callan, her father's old contact, one to a shipping insurance broker in the southern port, and one to a woman named Thess who ran a network of informants and had owed her father a favor for the last decade. She sent them before dawn, using channels that wouldn't trace back to the estate. Then she went down to breakfast and waited for Darian to realize he'd just made the first smart decision he'd made in years. The library became her territory. Garrett delivered the records as promised. Crates of ledgers, manifests, correspondence, insurance documents, all the paper evidence of an empire trying not to collapse. Leora spread them across every available surface, building a map of failure that was almost impressive in its scope. Darian's problems were worse than she'd thought. The northern route wasn't just compromised, it was effectively closed. The pirate group controlling it, a loose coalition calling themselves the Red Hands, had grown organized enough to demand tribute from anyone trying to pass through. The few ships that refused were either captured or sunk. Insurance companies had tripled their premiums, then stopped offering coverage altogether. But that was just the visible problem. Digging deeper, Leora found others. Suppliers who'd raised prices because they knew Darian was desperate. Buyers who'd renegotiated contracts to their advantage. Debts that had been restructured with terms that looked reasonable until you saw the interest rates compounding in the margins. Darian had been bleeding for years. The marriage to her had just slowed the bleeding. It hadn't stopped it. She was cross-referencing a shipping manifest with a corresponding insurance claim when Darian appeared in the doorway. Finding anything useful? He asked. Leora didn't look up. Your supplier in Whitehaven is overcharging you by 30%. Impossible. We've worked with Marsh & Sons for 15 years. Exactly. They know you can't afford to switch suppliers mid-season, so they're taking advantage. Look. She held up 2 documents. This is what they charged you 2 years ago for the same order. This is what they're charging now. The only thing that's changed is how desperate you are. Darian crossed to the desk, took the papers, and went very still. I could renegotiate, Leora said, or find a new supplier. I know 3 operations in the southern ports that could match Marsh's quality for 20% less. Why would they negotiate with you? Because I'm Marcus Vance's daughter, and in the world I come from, that still means something. Darian set the papers down carefully. I'm beginning to understand why your father was so successful. He taught me to see what people don't want you to see, the real numbers behind the pleasant fiction. She met Darian's eyes. He also taught me that the most dangerous moment in any negotiation is when you start believing your own lies. Meaning? Meaning you've been telling yourself this is temporary, that one good season will fix everything, that you just need to hold on a little longer. Leora gestured at the sea of documents. But this isn't temporary. You're not having a bad year. You're in a structural collapse that's been building for a decade. And unless you're willing to make actual changes, not just patch the holes and hope, you're going to lose everything. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. You're remarkably blunt, Darian said finally. I'm remarkably tired of watching you drown while pretending you're swimming. What would you do? The question came out rough, like it hurt to ask. If this were your problem, what would you actually do? Leora had been waiting for this question. Cut the northern route entirely, she said. Stop throwing money at a problem you can't solve through normal channels. Redirect everything to the Southern Passage for now. Yes, it's slower, but it's reliable. Renegotiate your supplier contracts, all of them. Fire at least 3 of your managers, the ones who've been telling you what you want to hear instead of what you need to hear. And she hesitated. And what? And stop trying to maintain the appearance of strength. You're not fooling anyone. The creditors know you're struggling. The suppliers know. Everyone knows except maybe you. Leora softened her voice slightly. There's a difference between dignity and delusion. Darian turned away, his shoulders tight. For a moment she thought he might explode, might throw her out of the library and go back to drowning alone. Instead, he laughed. It was a short, bitter sound, but it was real. My father would have had you thrown out for that, he said. Your father isn't here. No, he's not. Darian looked at her again, and this time there was something different in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition, like he was seeing her for the first time as something other than a contract clause. All right, do it. The suppliers, the routes, all of it. You have authority to negotiate on behalf of the estate. In writing. His eyebrows rose. You don't trust my word? I trust paper more than promises. No offense. None taken. He moved to the desk, pulled out a sheet of letterhead, and wrote quickly. When he handed it to her, his signature was still wet. Don't make me regret this. I'll try not to bankrupt you completely. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. He left, and Leora sat alone among the ledgers and manifests, holding a piece of paper that gave her more power than she'd had since her father died. She got to work. The response from Callan arrived a week later, hidden in a shipment of books Leora had ordered. Marcus's daughter. Should have known you'd resurface. The Red Hand situation is complicated, but manageable. They're not ideologues, they're businessmen who found a profitable enterprise. The right approach might surprise you. I can facilitate an introduction if you're serious. But this isn't a game for amateurs, and it's not something you can do from a country estate. Leora read it 3 times, then burned it. An introduction meant traveling. It meant going to the northern ports, into the heart of the compromised territory, to negotiate with people who made their living through violence. It meant risk, real risk. The kind her father had thrived on and her uncle had always been too afraid to take. She found Darian in the study that evening, working through correspondence with the grim focus of a man trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. I need to travel, she said without preamble. He looked up, clearly exhausted. Where? North, to the ports. I have a contact who can arrange a meeting with the people controlling the northern route. Darian's expression shifted from tired to alert. The red hands. Yes? Absolutely not. I wasn't asking permission. I was telling you my plan. Then let me tell you mine. You're staying here where it's safe. I'll send Garrett, or they won't talk to Garrett. Leora crossed to the desk, planted her hands on the surface, and leaned in.
They'll talk to me because I'm Marcus Vance's daughter and because I have something they want, which is legitimacy. Right now, they're pirates, criminals. They can't move their operation into anything larger because no legitimate merchant will work with them. But if they could negotiate a stable arrangement with a duke's estate, she let that hang. They could transition from outlaws to privateers.
It's not respectability, but it's a step toward it. Darian stared at her. You want to legitimize pirates. I want to turn an enemy into an asset. There's a difference. This is insane. This is how you survive. Leora straightened. You can keep doing things the safe way, the traditional way, the way your father and grandfather did them. And you can watch this estate die slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but debt and regret. Or you can take a risk. Risk get people killed. So does starving. She softened her voice. Darian, I know this is outside your world, but it's not outside mine. I grew up in this life. I know how to read these situations, how to negotiate with people who live in the margins. Let me do what I'm good at. He was quiet for a long time, his fingers drumming against the desk in a rhythm that suggested he was fighting an internal war. If I agree to this, he said finally, you don't go alone. I don't need a chaperone. You need protection. This isn't negotiable, Leora. If you're walking into a meeting with criminals, you're doing it with someone capable of getting you out if things go wrong. She wanted to argue, but there was something in his voice that stopped her. Not control or condescension, but genuine concern. Fine, she said, but someone competent, not one of your aging estate managers. I'll go myself. That surprised her. You? It's my estate, my responsibility. If you're risking yourself for it, the least I can do is risk myself alongside you. Leora studied him, looking for the angle, the hidden motive. But all she saw was a man who was tired of losing. All right, she said. We leave in 3 days. I'll make the arrangements. 3 days? That's how long it'll take me to get confirmations from my contacts and plan a route that won't get us killed before we reach the meeting. She headed for the door. Pack light. And Darian? Yes? Try not to act like a duke when we get there. These people don't care about titles. She left him sitting in the study, probably regretting every decision that had led to this moment. But he didn't call her back. And 3 days later, they left for the northern ports together. The carriage rattled over broken roads that hadn't seen proper maintenance in years. Leora watched the landscape shift from pastoral countryside to industrial sprawl, factories belching smoke, warehouses crowding the waterfront, the kind of places where fortunes were made and lost before breakfast. Darian sat across from her, jaw tight, one hand resting on something hidden beneath his coat. A pistol, probably. Like that would help if things went truly wrong. You're nervous, Leora said. I'm cautious. There's a difference. Cautious people don't agree to meet with pirates. Desperate people do. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Are you afraid? Terrified, Leora said honestly, but fear doesn't excuse inaction. My father used to say that the only unforgivable mistake in business is standing still while the world moves around you. Your father sounds like he took a lot of risks. He did. Some of them killed him. The words came out harder than she'd intended. Darian went quiet, and Leora turned back to the window, watching the port city of Harwick emerge from the haze like something built from coal dust and bad decisions. They'd sent word ahead through Callan's network. The meeting was set for tonight, neutral ground, a warehouse district where the law didn't ask too many questions, and violence had its own economics. Leora had arranged for rooms at an inn that catered to merchants who valued discretion over comfort, the kind of place where the proprietor knew how to forget faces. Stay close to me when we arrive, Darian said as the carriage slowed. And if anything feels wrong, I'll signal you. We've been over this. I need to hear you say you understand the danger. Leora met his eyes. I understand that if this goes badly, we might not leave that warehouse alive. I understand that we're negotiating with people who solve problems with blades and bullets. I understand that I'm a woman walking into a room full of men who see women as either currency or entertainment. She paused. What I don't understand is why you think I haven't already calculated all of that. The carriage stopped. Darian didn't move. Because you're not acting like someone who's calculated it, he said quietly. You're acting like someone who's already decided it's worth dying for. Maybe it is. Why? The question hung between them like smoke. Leora could have lied, could have given him something simple and noble about duty or survival. Instead, she told the truth. Because I'm tired of being invisible. Because every day in that estate, I feel myself disappearing into someone else's idea of who I should be. Because if I'm going to be trapped in this marriage, this life, I'd rather die trying to make it mean something than survive as your well-dressed ghost. Darian's expression did something complicated. Then he opened the carriage door and climbed out, offering his hand to help her down. She took it, felt the strength in his grip, and wondered if he understood what she'd just told him. The inn was exactly as advertised, functional, anonymous, and probably crawling with informants. They checked in under false names, minimal luggage, and went upstairs to wait for nightfall. Leora's room was small, the bed narrow, the window facing an alley where stray dogs fought over scraps. She unpacked her father's ledger, the one thing she'd brought that mattered, and reviewed her notes one more time. The approach, the angles, the leverage points, everything she needed to turn enemies into allies, or at least into people who'd take her money and leave the shipping lanes alone. A knock at the door made her look up. "It's me?" Darian called. She let him in. He'd changed into darker clothes, nothing that screamed aristocracy. Smart. "Callan sent a message," he said, holding out a folded paper. "The meeting's been moved up, 2 hours from now." Leora read the note. Short, cryptic, but clear enough. They want to see if you're serious. Early meeting tests commitment. Come alone or don't come at all. "That's a trap," Darian said flatly. "Maybe. Or it's exactly what it says. A test. You can't go alone." "I have to." "Leora, listen to me." She stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "If I show up with an armed duke, I look weak, like I need protection, like I don't trust my own ability to negotiate. That's not the impression I can afford to give. And if they kill you, then you inherit my father's entire network free and clear, and you can mourn appropriately at my funeral." The joke landed wrong. Darian didn't smile. "I'm not going to die. I'm going to walk in there, make them an offer they'd be idiots to refuse, and walk out with an agreement that saves your shipping routes." "You don't know that." "No," Leora admitted, "but I know I can't live the rest of my life wondering if I was too afraid to try." Darian looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to forbid her, wanted to do anything that would give him back control. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a knife. Small, sharp, the kind designed to be hidden. "Take this," he said. "I don't know how to use it. You don't have to be good. You just have to be willing." He pressed it into her palm. "If someone gets too close, aim for soft tissue. Throat, stomach, eyes. Don't hesitate." Leora closed her fingers around the handle. It was heavier than she'd expected. "Thank you," she said. Darian nodded, then did something that surprised her. He lifted his hand and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, the gesture so gentle it made her chest ache. "Come back," he said. "Whatever happens in that warehouse, come back." She left before she could promise something she might not be able to keep. The warehouse district smelled like salt, rust, and things rotting in corners no one bothered to clean. Leora walked alone, following the directions Callan had provided, trying to look confident while her heart hammered against her ribs. The building was exactly where it was supposed to be, a squat structure with broken windows and a door hanging half off its hinges. Light leaked from inside, voices carried on the wind. She counted at least 4 people, maybe more. Leora adjusted the knife hidden in her sleeve, took a breath that didn't steady her at all, and pushed the door open. The room beyond was larger than she'd expected, lit by lanterns hanging from rusted chains. Crates were stacked along the walls, some marked with shipping company logos, others with symbols she didn't recognize. And in the center, sitting around a table made from planks and sawhorses, were 5 people who looked exactly like what they were, criminals who'd found profit in chaos. The woman at the head of the table spoke first. "Marcus Vance's daughter." Her voice was smoke and gravel, years of shouting over waves and wind.
She was maybe 50, built like someone who'd spent her life hauling rope and breaking skulls, with scars running down one side of her face. You look like him. Same eyes, same stupid bravery. You knew my father? Leora kept her voice steady. Knew of him. He ran these routes before we did, back when they were legitimate. Smart man. Heard he died choking on his own ambition. Heart failure, actually, but close enough. The woman smiled, showing teeth that had seen better days. I'm Reva. These are my people. She gestured around the table. You wanted to talk. So, talk. Leora stepped forward, not too close, keeping her hands visible. You're bleeding the northern route dry. Every ship that passes through pays tribute or gets sunk. It's profitable short term, but eventually you're going to kill the trade entirely. No ships means no tribute. You're eating your own future. We're aware, Reva said dryly. But we're pirates, sweetheart. Long-term planning isn't our specialty. It could be. That got their attention. One of the men leaned forward, younger than Reva, with a face that suggested violence came naturally to him. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're sitting on leverage you're not using. Leora pulled out a folded document from her coat, set it on the table. This is a contract, a formal arrangement between the Crow estate and your organization. We pay you a monthly fee, significant but sustainable, and in return you guarantee safe passage for our ships. No tribute, no seizures, no uncertainty. Reva picked up the document, scanned it, then laughed. You want to pay us to not rob you? That's adorable. I want to pay you to become something more than robbers. Leora leaned against the table, matching Reva's posture. Right now, you're criminals. You can't expand, can't legitimize, can't operate in any port with actual law enforcement. But if you're working under contract with a duke's estate, you're privateers. You're an authorized security force. It's a small change on paper, but it means everything for what you can do next. The room went quiet. Leora could feel them thinking, calculating, weighing the angle. What's the catch? The younger man asked. The catch is you have to actually keep the routes safe. Not just from yourselves, but from anyone else who tries to move in. You become the guarantors of security in these waters, which means you have to care whether ships make it through. And if we don't like those terms, Leora straightened, meeting his eyes, then you keep bleeding a dying route until there's nothing left. And eventually the Crown sends enough warships to wipe you out because you've become more trouble than you're worth. Or you take the money, the legitimacy, and the chance to build something that lasts longer than next month. Reva set the contract down, studying Leora with an expression that was hard to read. You talk like a merchant, but you walk into a pirate den alone, unarmed, and start making demands. That's not merchant behavior. That's something else. That's desperation wearing confidence like a coat. Honest. I like that. Reva stood, walked around the table. She was taller than Leora, broader, the kind of presence that filled a room. But here's the problem. Marcus's daughter, we don't trust merchants. We especially don't trust nobles. And we really don't trust people who show up with contracts that sound too good to be legitimate. Then trust math, Leora said. How much do you make per month right now? Average it out. Factor in the ships you sink, the cargo you can't sell, the constant need to stay ahead of patrols. Now compare that to a guaranteed income every month, no risk, no chasing ships through storms. She's got a point, one of the other men muttered. Reva held up a hand, silencing him. Let me tell you how this looks from where I'm standing. You walk in here, offer us gold and legitimacy, and ask for trust we haven't earned from each other. That tells me one of two things. Either you're genuinely desperate, or this is a setup and you're bait. Leora's mouth went dry. It's not a setup. Prove it. How? Reva smiled, and it wasn't friendly. Tell me something valuable. Something that proves you're not just some noble plain merchant. Give me information worth the risk of believing you. This was the moment. The test beneath the test. Leora could feel the weight of it, the way the entire negotiation balanced on what she said next. She thought of her father's ledger, hidden back at the inn. All those routes, those contacts, those secrets that made his network valuable. She could give them something small, something that wouldn't hurt her but might buy trust. Or she could gamble everything. The Crown is planning a major patrol increase in these waters, Leora said quietly. 3 months from now.
They're calling it a security initiative, but what it really is a crackdown. They've allocated funds for new ships, better weapons, and they're hiring captains who've made their careers hunting people like you. Reva's expression didn't change. How do you know this? Because one of those captains is married to my cousin, and he drinks too much at family dinners. The Crown thinks increased patrols will solve the piracy problem. They're wrong, but they're committed. That information could save our lives. Reva's voice was soft now, dangerous. Why give it to us? Because I need you to believe I'm serious. And because if we don't make this deal, those patrols will destroy you anyway. At least this way, we both survive. The silence stretched. Leora could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the knife against her forearm, useless as comfort. Then Reva started laughing. It was a rough sound, genuine, and somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. You're either the bravest fool I've ever met or the smartest liar, Reva said. Either way, I respect it. She picked up the contract again. We'll take your deal, 3-month trial. You pay, we guarantee passage, and at the end of 90 days, we renegotiate based on how well it's working. 6 months, Leora countered. 3 months isn't long enough to establish trust or prove sustainability. 4 months. And if you miss a payment, the deal's void and we go back to hunting your ships like everyone else's. Leora extended her hand. Done. Reva looked at it, then clasped it hard enough to hurt. You've got steel in you, girl. Your father would be proud. Or horrified. Probably both. Definitely both. They hammered out the details, payment schedules, communication protocols, what constituted a breach. It took another hour, the kind of brutal negotiation where every word mattered and concessions came wrapped in barbs. But eventually, they had something that looked like an agreement. Leora signed it. Reva made her mark. The younger man witnessed it with a signature that looked like he'd learned to write recently and violently. One more thing, Reva said as Leora folded her copy. Your Duke. Is he going to honor this? He'll honor it. You sound certain. I am. Leora met her eyes. Because if he doesn't, I'll make him wish he'd drowned in debt instead. Reva laughed again. I like you. Try not to get killed on your way out. It'd be a waste. Leora left the warehouse with the contract burning a hole in her coat and her hands shaking so badly she had to shove them in her pockets. She made it 3 blocks before she had to stop, lean against a wall, and breathe through the nausea that came with delayed terror. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Now she just had to convince Darian to agree to terms she'd negotiated without his permission. The walk back to the inn felt longer than the walk out. Every shadow looked like a threat, every sound like pursuit. But no one followed her, no one stopped her, and eventually she was climbing the stairs to the 2nd floor and knocking on Darian's door. He opened it immediately, like he'd been waiting right there. You're alive, he said. Disappointed? Don't. His voice cracked slightly. Don't joke about that. Leora stepped inside and pulled out the contract. We have a deal. 4-month trial, guaranteed safe passage, monthly payments that are high but manageable if we redirect funds from the failed routes. Darian took the document, read it, and went very still. You agreed to pay them $4,000 a month. Yes. That's more than we're currently losing to them. It's also guaranteed. No uncertainty, no seized cargo, no insurance nightmares. And in 4 months, if it's working, we renegotiate for better terms. If it's not, we're no worse off than we are now. You had no authority to make this agreement. You gave me authority to negotiate on behalf of the estate. I negotiated. Not for this. Darian's voice rose. You can't just... Leora, this is my estate, my responsibility, your disaster that I'm trying to fix. She stepped toward him, anger finally breaking through the fear. You asked me to help. You gave me permission to find a solution. And I did. I walked into a room full of people who kill for a living, and I made them see that cooperation was more profitable than violence. That's what I do. That's what I'm good at. So don't stand there and tell me I overstepped when you've been drowning for years because you were too proud to admit you needed someone who actually knows how to swim. The words hit him like a physical blow. Darian staggered back a step, his face going pale. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Leora hadn't expected that. What? I'm sorry, you're right. He set the contract down carefully.
I've been treating you like a resource instead of a partner, like something I could use when convenient and ignore the rest of the time. And you just risked your life to save my estate, and the first thing I did was criticize how you did it." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know how to trust someone else's judgment on things I've always controlled. I don't know how to admit that I need help, that I've been failing, that everything I thought I knew about running an estate was wrong." Leora felt something shift in her chest, some of the anger draining away. "Then learn," she said, "because I can't keep fighting you and the actual problems at the same time." "I know." Darian picked up the contract again. 4 months. We can make that work if we're careful. If we consolidate the other routes, reduce staff in redundant positions, and... He stopped. "I'm doing it again, aren't I? Taking over." "Little bit." "What do you think we should do?" The question felt like handing her a weapon. Leora took it carefully. "I think we need to talk to Garrett and the other managers tomorrow. Explain the situation, get their input on the restructuring. Then we implement changes fast before word spreads and creditors start panicking." She paused. "And I think you need to start trusting that I know what I'm doing. I'm trying. Try harder. Try." Darian nodded. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A real smile. Small, but genuine. "You terrify me a little, you know that?" "Good. You should be terrified of me. I'm starting to think everyone should be." They stood there in the small room, the contract between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Outside, the port city continued its endless commerce of legal and illegal enterprise, ships coming and going on tides that cared nothing for human ambition. "We should leave at first light," Darian said. "Get back to the estate before rumors start." "Agreed." "And Leora?" He caught her hand as she turned to go. "Thank you for risking this, for..." He struggled with the words. "For not giving up on something I'd already abandoned." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to make it work." She went back to her room, locked the door, and collapsed onto the narrow bed. Every muscle ached, her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and she kept replaying the moment in the warehouse when Riva had asked her to prove herself and she'd gambled everything on truth. But she'd won. She'd actually won. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sounds of the port and the echo of Reva's voice. "You've got steel in you, girl." Morning arrived too early. Leora packed quickly, met Darian downstairs, and they boarded the carriage without ceremony. The ride back was quieter than the ride out, both of them exhausted, both processing what had just happened. They were an hour from the estate when the carriage lurched violently and stopped. "What's wrong?" Darian called to the driver. No answer. Darian reached for his pistol. Leora's hand went to the knife in her sleeve. The carriage door was yanked open from outside. 3 men stood there armed, faces covered with cloth. The leader held a rifle pointed directly at Darian's chest. "Out," he said. "Both of you. Now." This wasn't random. Leora could see it in their positions, their coordination. Someone had known they'd be on this road, at this time. Someone had been watching. Darian moved first, climbing out slowly, hands visible. Leora followed, her mind racing through options and finding nothing good. "We don't have much money," Darian said calmly, "but you're welcome to what we have." "We don't want your money." The leader stepped closer. "We want to know what you were doing in Harwick, who you met with, what deals you made. A spy, or an informant working for creditors, or competitors, or any of a dozen people who'd profit from seeing Darian's estate fail." "I don't know what you're talking about," Darian said. The rifle shifted to point at Leora. "I think you do." Leora felt the world narrow to that barrel, to the finger on the trigger, to the absolute certainty that she was about to die on a forest road because someone wanted information she couldn't give without destroying everything she'd just built. Then Darian moved. He was fast, faster than she'd expected, lunging for the rifle and yanking it up just as it fired. The shot went wild, and suddenly everything was chaos. Darian grappling with the leader, the other 2 men closing in, Leora pulling the knife from her sleeve because it was the only weapon she had. One of the men grabbed her arm. She twisted, slashed, felt the blade connect with flesh. He screamed and let go. She ran, not away, but toward the carriage,
Because the driver might have something. Might have... The world exploded in pain. Something hit her from behind, hard and precise, right below her ribs. She went down, tasted dirt and blood, tried to breathe and couldn't. Gunfire, shouting. Darian's voice, desperate and raw, calling her name. Then darkness, closing in from the edges, and the last thing she heard was someone saying, "Leave her, she's already dead." She wasn't dead. The realization came in fragments, pain first, bright and vicious, radiating from somewhere below her ribs. Then sound. Branches breaking, heavy breathing that wasn't hers, the wet crunch of boots on forest floor. Then movement, the sick feeling of being carried, her body limp against something solid. Leora tried to open her eyes. The world swam, darkness and fragments of gray sky visible through tree cover. She tried to speak. Nothing came out but a sound like air escaping something broken. "Don't." Darian's voice close to her ear, raw as torn metal. "Don't try to talk. Just stay with me." She felt his arms around her, one beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees. He was running, or trying to. His gait uneven, stumbling over roots and rocks, but moving, always moving. "Put me down," she managed. The words came out wet. "No." "You can't." She coughed, tasted copper. "Can't carry me. Too heavy." "You weigh nothing. Shut up and breathe." But breathing hurt. Everything hurt. She tried to catalog the damage like her father had taught her to assess a failing business. Find the critical problems first, the ones that'll kill you if you don't address them. The pain was centered low on her right side. Stabbing. Not a bullet. She'd felt the impact, something blunt and deliberate. A knife maybe, or a club. Hard to tell when your insides felt like they were on fire. "The men," she whispered. "Dead or gone?" "I don't know. I didn't stay to check." Darian's voice cracked. "I just grabbed you and ran." "The driver, dead. They shot him first. Leora, please stop talking." She tried to turn her head, to see where they were going, but the movement sent fresh agony through her torso, and she gasped, vision graying at the edges. "I know," Darian said, and she realized he'd felt her go rigid. "I know it hurts. We're almost there." "Almost where?" "Somewhere. Anywhere. I don't know." That should have terrified her. Instead, it was almost funny. A duke running through a forest with no plan, no destination, just blind momentum fueled by the refusal to accept what they both knew. She was bleeding somewhere inside, and without help, she wasn't going to last long. The trees thinned. Darian burst through into a clearing, and Leora saw a structure ahead, small, barely more than a shed, probably used by hunters or travelers. He carried her inside, kicked the door shut, and lowered her carefully onto the dirt floor. "Stay awake," he said, already moving. "Don't close your eyes." Not planning to, but it was a lie. Her eyes wanted to close, everything wanted to close. Darian was tearing through the shed, searching for anything useful. He found a ratty blanket, wadded it up, pressed it against her side where the pain was worst. The pressure made her scream, I'm sorry, I have to." His hands were shaking. Blood, her blood, was already soaking through the fabric. "We need to stop the bleeding." "Internal," Leora said through gritted teeth. "You can't stop internal bleeding with pressure." "Then what do I do?" "Get me to a doctor." "The nearest town is 8 miles. You won't survive 8 miles." "Then I guess I'm dying here." "No." The word came out fierce. Darian leaned over her, his face inches from hers, and she'd never seen anyone look so desperate. "No. You don't get to give up. Not after everything. Not after—" He stopped, something breaking in his expression. "Not after what?" Leora asked. "Not after I just started seeing you." The confession hung between them, raw and terrifying in its honesty. Leora wanted to respond, wanted to say something that would match that vulnerability. But the pain was climbing, spreading like fire through her chest, and she couldn't find the breath. Darian's hand found hers, squeezed hard enough to hurt. "I'm going to carry you to Millbrook," he said. "There's a doctor there. It's the closest option." "This 8 miles," Leora reminded him. "Carrying me."
I don't care. You'll collapse before we get halfway.
Probably. This is a terrible plan. It's the only plan. He released her hand, started gathering what little supplies the shed held. The blanket, a length of rope he fashioned into a crude sling. I'm going to need you to hold on. Can you do that? Leora looked at him. This man she'd married for his title, who'd married her for her money, who'd barely acknowledged her existence until she'd forced him to see her as more than a contract. This man who was now preparing to carry her through miles of forest on nothing but stubborn refusal to let her die. Yeah, she said, I can hold on. He lifted her again, this time securing her against his chest with the rope sling so her weight was distributed across his shoulders. It wasn't comfortable, nothing was comfortable, but it freed his hands and gave him better balance. Then he started walking. The first hour was the worst. Every step jolted her, sent fresh waves of pain radiating through her torso. Leora bit down on the inside of her cheek to keep from screaming, tasted blood, and focused on breathing. Just breathing. In and out, shallow and careful, trying not to move anything that might be torn inside. Darian didn't speak. All his concentration was on putting one foot in front of the other, navigating roots and rocks, and the uneven terrain of a forest that hadn't been designed for this kind of travel. She could feel him struggling, feel the tremor in his arms, the hitch in his gait when he stepped wrong. You can rest, she said when the pain ebbed slightly. No. Darian, if I stop, I won't start again, so we keep moving. She wanted to argue, but he was right. She could feel herself slipping, the edges of consciousness getting fuzzy, and she knew that if he stopped, if he gave in to exhaustion even for a moment, they were both finished. So she focused on staying awake. She counted his steps. She watched the light change through the trees, afternoon fading toward evening. She thought about her father, about all the times he'd told her that survival was just stubbornness wearing a fancy name. Tell me something, Darian said suddenly. His voice startled her back from wherever she'd been drifting. What? Tell me something about you. Something I don't know. Keep talking. She understood what he was doing, keeping her conscious, keeping her anchored. It was smart. It was also asking a lot when breathing was already a monumental effort. Like what? She managed. Anything. Your childhood, your father. Why you know so much about shipping routes. Leora closed her eyes. Not because she was giving up, but because it was easier to remember with them closed. I was 8, she said slowly. The first time my father took me to the docks. My mother had just died. He didn't know what to do with me. Didn't know how to be both parents at once. So he took me to work. What happened? I watched him negotiate a contract with a captain who was trying to overcharge for a silk shipment from the eastern provinces. The captain kept insisting the silk was premium quality, worth double the going rate. My father let him talk for 10 minutes. Then he pulled out a thread from the sample, lit it on fire, and proved it wasn't pure silk. It was mixed with cotton. Darian stumbled slightly, caught himself. How did burning it prove that? Silk burns different than cotton, smells different. My father taught me to verify everything, trust nothing on appearance alone. She coughed, pain lancing through her. He negotiated the price down to half what the captain was asking. Then he bought me candied ginger from a street vendor and told me I'd just learned the most important lesson in business. People will lie to you with confidence, so you need to know the truth before you walk into the room. He sounds like he was a good father. He was a complicated father, good at teaching, bad at comfort. I think he loved me, but he didn't know how to show it except by making me competent. That's more than most people get. What about yours? Leora asked. Your father? Darian was quiet for a long moment. His breathing had gotten heavier, labored. My father believed the estate was everything, he said finally. The land, the title, the legacy. He didn't care if we were happy as long as we were maintaining appearances. When crops failed, he threw parties to prove we were still wealthy. When creditors came calling, he bought new horses to show we weren't worried. He died believing that if you looked strong enough, you'd become strong. You don't believe that. I used to. Then I married you and realized I'd been doing exactly what he did, pretending everything was fine while it all fell apart. He adjusted his grip, kept walking. You saved me from that, from becoming him. I haven't saved anything yet. You're wrong. The forest was getting darker.
Leora could feel time moving wrong, too fast and too slow at once. She wasn't sure how long they'd been walking. An hour? 3? Her sense of time had become untethered. How much farther? She asked. I don't know, a few more miles maybe. You're lying. Yeah, I'm lying. She almost laughed, but it turned into a cough that brought blood to her lips. Darian saw it, and something in his face went hard and terrified at the same time. Stay with me, he said. Trying. Try harder. They kept moving. The light faded completely, and Darian had to navigate by memory and instinct, following what he hoped was the direction of Millbrook. Leora drifted in and out, the pain becoming something distant and unreal, like it was happening to someone else. She dreamed, or maybe hallucinated. Her father standing at the end of a dock, counting ships. Her mother singing in a kitchen that smelled like bread and honey. Reva laughing in a warehouse, saying, "Try not to get killed, it'd be a waste." Leora, Darian's voice cut through the fog. Leora, wake up. She opened her eyes. The world was too dark, too blurry. What? I need you to stay awake now. We're close. I can see lights. She tried to focus, to see what he was seeing. There. Through the trees, flickering yellow lights. A settlement. Civilization. Hope. Darian broke into something between a run and a stagger, crashing through underbrush toward those lights. Leora felt every impact, every jarring step, but she didn't tell him to stop. They were so close. They burst out of the forest into the edge of a small town. A few buildings, a main road, the kind of place that closed up at sunset and didn't ask questions about strangers. Help! Darian's voice was hoarse, almost gone. Someone help! A door opened. Then another. People emerged, cautious at first, then moving faster when they saw him. A man covered in blood, carrying a woman who looked more dead than alive. Doctor, Darian gasped. Where's your doctor? End of the road, someone said. A woman, older, with a shawl wrapped tight. The house with the blue door. Is she? She's alive. She's staying alive. He ran. Leora felt the motion like she was underwater, everything distant and strange. They reached a house. Darian kicked the door open without knocking, and suddenly there was light and warmth and voices. What in the... An older man, gray-haired, still wearing an apron like he'd been interrupted mid-dinner. Who are you? What happened? She was stabbed, or clubbed, internal bleeding. She needs help now. Darian lowered Leora onto a table, his arms finally giving out. He collapsed beside her, breathing in ragged gasps. The doctor moved fast, hands already examining the wound, peeling back the bloody blanket. His expression went grim. How long ago? Hours, I don't know. 4, maybe 5. And you carried her? There was no choice. The doctor looked at Darian like he was insane, then back at Leora. I need to operate. Now. There's damage inside, probably to the spleen or liver. She might not survive it. She'll survive, Darian said. It wasn't hope. It was a command. The doctor called for his assistant, a young woman who appeared with supplies and calm efficiency. They moved Leora to another room, a surgery of sorts, with tools laid out and light from multiple lamps. You need to leave, the doctor told Darian. No. You're no use to her unconscious on my floor. There's a chair in the hall. Sit. Don't move. If I need you, I'll call. Darian looked like he wanted to argue, but his body was done. He let the assistant guide him out, and the last thing Leora saw before they closed the door was his face, exhausted, terrified, and absolutely unwilling to accept that this might be the end. The surgery was pain without context. Leora felt hands inside her, felt things being moved and pressed and cut, but it was all happening somewhere far away. The doctor worked in silence, occasionally muttering instructions to his assistant, and Leora floated above it all, tethered to consciousness by the thinnest thread. At some point, she heard the doctor say, "She's lucky. Punctured kidney, but the blade missed the major vessels. If it had gone an inch to the left..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Time became meaningless. There was pain, then numbness as something was administered, then more pain as he stitched her back together. Leora tried to stay present, tried to remember why it mattered whether she survived, but exhaustion was pulling her down like an undertow. "That's all I can do," the doctor said finally.
The rest is up to her. They moved her to a bed. Clean sheets, soft pillow, the kind of comfort that felt almost obscene after hours of agony. Leora wanted to tell them thank you, wanted to ask if Darian was all right, but her voice wouldn't work. She slept instead. Deep, dreamless sleep that could have been death's cousin. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through a window and Darian was sitting in a chair beside the bed, his head in his hands. He looked terrible, clothes torn and bloody, face haggard, dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept at all. "Hey," Leora croaked. His head snapped up. For a moment he just stared at her like he couldn't believe she was real. Then he moved to the bedside, his hand finding hers with desperate precision. "You're awake." "Apparently." Her voice was gravel. "How long?" 2 days. The doctor said you might not wake up, that the trauma was too severe." His grip tightened. "But you did. You're too stubborn not to. Learn from the best." Darian laughed, a broken sound. "Don't do that again. Don't almost die on me." "I'll try to avoid it." "I'm serious, Leora. When I was carrying you through that forest, when I thought you were going to die in my arms before we reached help." He stopped, struggling. "I realized something." "What?" "That I can't do this without you. Not the estate, not the business, not any of it. I need you, not your father's money, not your connections. You." The words settled between them, honest and raw. Leora squeezed his hand, the only response she could manage with her body still held together by stitches and hope. "The attackers," she said. "Did you see who sent them?" "No, but I have theories." His expression darkened. "Someone knew we went to Harwick. Someone knew what route we'd take back. That's not random." "The creditors?" "Maybe. Or competitors who don't want us stabilizing the routes. Or someone in my own household selling information." He leaned back, exhausted. "I don't know who to trust anymore." "Trust me." "I do. That's the problem. I've spent my entire life trusting titles and bloodlines and tradition, and none of it saved me. But you walked into a pirate den and negotiated peace. You took a knife wound and stayed conscious long enough for me to get you to help. You're the only real thing in my life right now." Leora felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked away since her father died, and she'd been sold into this marriage like cargo. "We're going to survive this," she said. "The attack, the creditors, all of it. We're going to figure out who betrayed us, and we're going to make them regret it." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we will." The doctor came in then, checked her stitches with professional detachment, and declared her stable but not ready to travel for at least a week. "A week?" Darian protested. "We need to get back to the estate." "Then you'll be carrying her corpse, because moving her now will tear everything I just repaired." The doctor gave him a look that suggested he'd dealt with impatient nobles before. "She needs rest. Real rest. Not a carriage ride through rough country." Darian looked at Leora. She nodded slightly. The doctor was right, and they both knew it. "1 week," Darian said. "Then we go home." The doctor left. Darian settled back into his chair, clearly planning to maintain his vigil. "You should sleep," Leora said. "I will." "You're lying." "Yeah, I'm lying." They stayed like that. Leora in the bed, Darian in the chair, both of them alive against considerable odds. Outside, the town went about its business, oblivious to the fact that a duke and his merchant wife were hiding in a doctor's spare room, trying to figure out who wanted them dead. The week passed in slow increments. Leora's body healed with the grudging cooperation of someone who'd pushed past what should have been fatal. The doctor changed her dressings daily, muttering about miracles and stubbornness in equal measure. Darian barely left her side. He sent a message to the estate, carefully worded, vague about their location, just enough to let key people know they were alive. The response came back with news that made his jaw tighten. Garrett had disappeared. Just vanished the day after they'd left for Harwick. "He sold us out," Darian said, showing Leora the letter. "He had to. He knew our route, knew our timing. He's the only one who could have given that information to the attackers." "Why?" "Money, probably. Or fear. The creditors might have gotten to him, threatened him into cooperating. Darian crumpled the letter. It doesn't matter. When we get back, I'm tearing apart every contract, every agreement, every relationship until I find everyone who's been working against us. And then what? Then we burn it all down and rebuild from scratch. There was something fierce in his voice, something Leora recognized from the warehouse when she'd negotiated with Reva, the sound of someone who'd stopped playing by rules that were designed to make them lose. On the seventh day, Leora stood for the first time without wanting to scream. The wound still hurt, would hurt for weeks probably, but she could walk without assistance and breathe without feeling like her insides were trying to escape. We leave tomorrow, Darian told the doctor. I'll pay you double your fee for the discretion. The doctor took the money without comment. He'd stopped asking questions days ago, which suggested he understood exactly the kind of trouble they were in. That night, lying in the dark with Darian asleep in the chair beside her, Leora thought about the route back to the estate, about who might be waiting for them, about the fact that someone had tried to kill them and probably wouldn't stop just because they'd failed once. She touched the wound through her nightshirt, felt the ridge of stitches that marked where she'd almost died. They'd survived this. They'd survived everything so far. But the next attack would come, and when it did, they needed to be ready to fight back with everything they had. The carriage they hired was basic but functional. Darian had purchased weapons, a rifle, 2 pistols, enough ammunition to hold off a small army. He loaded them carefully while Leora watched from the doorway of the inn where they'd spent their last night in Millbrook. Expecting trouble? She asked. Counting on it. They left at dawn, taking back roads and changing their route twice to avoid predictability. Every mile felt like a held breath, waiting for the moment when someone would emerge from the trees with weapons drawn. But the attack didn't come. They made it within 2 miles of the estate without incident, and that's when Leora knew something was wrong. Stop the carriage, she said. Darian looked at her. What is it? It's too quiet. If someone wanted us dead, they would have hit us by now. Unless they're waiting for us at the estate. They both understood at the same time. The message they'd sent, the one that said they were coming home, it had told their enemies exactly where to find them. We can't go back, Leora said. Not directly, not without knowing what we're walking into. Darian stared ahead at the road that led to his family home, to everything he'd been raised to protect. Then he turned the carriage around. Where are we going? Leora asked. To get help. Real help. He met her eyes. You negotiated with pirates. Now we're going to ask them to return the favor. The return to Harwick took less time than the first trip. Desperation made for faster horses. Leora's wound ached with every jolt of the carriage, but she didn't complain. Pain was just information now, telling her she was still alive enough to feel it. They arrived at the port just after midnight, the city quieter than before, but still breathing with the kind of commerce that never completely slept. Darian had sent word ahead through channels Leora had established, coded messages that wouldn't make sense to anyone intercepting them, but would reach Reva clear enough. The meeting place was different this time, not a warehouse, but a tavern near the docks, the kind where the proprietor knew when to be deaf and blind. They entered through a back door, Leora moving carefully, one hand pressed against her side where the stitches pulled. Reva was waiting in a private room upstairs, alone except for the younger man who'd been at their first meeting. She looked at them both, taking in Darian's haggard appearance and the way Leora moved like every step cost her something. You look like hell, Reva said. Someone tried to kill us, Leora replied, lowering herself into a chair with more care than she wanted to show. We need to know who. And you think I know. I think you have ears in places we don't. I think if someone's been asking questions about Duke Crow's movements, about his business in Harwick, your people would have heard. Reva leaned back, studying them. You're asking me to involve myself in mainland politics. That's outside our arrangement. Our arrangement, Darian said, his voice hard, is that we pay you to keep the northern routes safe. Hard to do that if we're dead. Fair point, Reva gestured to the younger man. Tell them what you found. He pulled out a folded paper, spread it on the table. It was a list of names, some Leora recognized, most she didn't. We started asking around after your first visit, he said. Wanted to know who else was interested in the Crow Estate's business. Turned up 3 groups. First your creditors, They've been getting nervous, talking about calling in debts. Second, a merchant consortium out of the southern ports who've been trying to monopolize the northern trade routes. They see you stabilizing as a threat to their control. And the third? Leora asked. Your estate manager, Garrett. The young man tapped a name on the list. He's been meeting with representatives from Marsh & Sons, your supplier, the one you were planning to replace. Leora felt something cold settle in her stomach. Marsh knew we were going to renegotiate. More than that, Reva said. Marsh has been bleeding your estate dry for years, and they know that if you start shopping around, they lose a very profitable arrangement. So when Garrett came to them with information about your trip to Harwick, about the deal you were making with us, she shrugged. They saw an opportunity to solve the problem permanently. Garrett sold us out for what? Darian's voice was barely controlled. Money? A promise they'd keep him on when the estate collapsed? Both, probably. People don't betray their employers for principle. They do it because they're scared or greedy or both. Reva pushed the paper toward them. The men who attacked you were hired muscle from Whitehaven. We tracked them through a contact who supplies weapons to that kind of work. They were paid to make it look like a robbery, but their real job was to find out what deals you'd made and who you'd talked to. Killing you was just supposed to be a bonus. Leora looked at the names, the connections, the web of people who decided she and Darian were obstacles worth removing. It was almost impressive in its scope. Where's Garrett now? She asked. Disappeared. Probably ran the moment he heard you'd survived. The young man folded the paper. But Marsh & Sons is still operating openly. They don't know we've connected them to the attack. Yet, Leora said. Reva smiled. You're planning something. I'm planning to stop being everyone's easy target. Leora met her eyes. You said you wanted legitimacy, a way to transition from pirates to something that could operate in the open. I can give you that. But I need something in return. What? I need you to help us take down Marsh & Sons, publicly, completely. I need them destroyed in a way that sends a message to everyone else who thinks we're weak. Darian looked at her sharply. Leora. They tried to kill us, she said, not looking away from Reva. They hired men to murder us on a forest road and dump our bodies where no one would find them. I'm done playing defense. I'm done being the victim in someone else's profit calculation. Reva was quiet for a moment. Then she started laughing, that same rough, genuine sound from their first meeting. You really are Marcus Vance's daughter, she said. All right, we'll help. But this better be good, because once we move against a legitimate operation like Marsh, there's no going back to just being pirates. That's the point, Leora said. We all evolve, or we all die. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Leora spread out everything she knew about Marsh & Sons, their warehouses, their shipping schedules, their contracts, their reputation. The company was old, established, the kind of operation that had survived generations by being ruthless and connected. But they were also complacent. They'd never had to defend themselves against someone who understood their business as well as they did and had the backing of people who didn't care about legal niceties. Their biggest shipment comes in next week, Leora said, pointing to a schedule she'd memorized from the estate records. Silk and spices from the eastern trade routes, worth about $50,000 in total. It's uninsured. They stopped paying for insurance years ago because they've never had a problem. You want us to seize it, Reva said. I want you to seize it, document everything, and expose the fact that they've been price-fixing and bribing port officials to maintain their monopoly. Then I want you to offer the seized goods for sale at fair market value, with all proceeds going to establish a new trade cooperative that undercuts their entire operation. Darian stared at her. That's not just an attack, that's dismantling their entire business model. Yes. They'll fight back, legally, violently, every way they can. Let them try. Leora's voice was cold. By the time we're done, they'll be too busy defending themselves against corruption charges to come after us. And everyone else who was thinking about moving against the Crow estate will see what happens to people who make that mistake. Reva looked at her with something that might have been respect. This is going to start a war. Good. I'm tired of being ambushed. They hammered out the details, timing, coordination, what evidence needed to be gathered, and how. Reva's people would handle the seizure. Leora would handle the documentation, the exposure to authorities who could be trusted. the narrative that would turn Marsh from victim to villain. When they were done, the sky outside was starting to lighten. "One more thing," Darian said. "Our estate. We have reason to believe there are people there waiting for us. People who think we're either dead or too injured to fight back." "You want us to provide escort," Reva said. "I want you to help us retake our own home." "That's not part of our agreement." "Consider it an investment." Darian leaned forward. "If we can't secure our estate, we can't pay you. And if we can't pay you, your transition from pirates to privateers dies before it starts." Reva considered this, then nodded. "We'll send 20 people, armed. But this is the last favor. After this, the arrangement is strictly professional." "Understood," Leora said. They left the tavern as dawn broke, Reva's people already mobilizing. The plan was simple enough. Return to the estate with enough force to overwhelm whatever reception committee was waiting, secure the grounds, and root out anyone who'd been working against them. The execution would be harder. They reached the estate by mid-morning, approaching from the east through fields that gave them cover and visibility. Reva's people moved like they'd done this kind of work before. Silent, coordinated, efficient. Leora watched them and thought about how strange it was that pirates were now her most reliable allies. "Something's wrong," Darian said quietly.
Leora saw it too. The estate was too quiet. No smoke from the chimneys, no movement in the yards, none of the normal activity of a functioning household. "Everyone's gone," she said. "Or hiding." They moved closer, Reva's people spreading out to cover all approaches. The main house loomed ahead, windows dark, doors closed. It looked abandoned. They entered through the servants' entrance, weapons drawn. The kitchen was empty, breakfast dishes still on the table like people had left in the middle of eating. Leora felt her skin crawl. "Mrs. Hallis?" Darian called. "Petra? Anyone?" Silence. They searched room by room, finding nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just absence. The entire household had vanished. Then they heard it, a sound from the cellar. Movement, shuffling, voices speaking low and frightened. Darian reached the cellar door first, pulled it open. "Who's down there?" "Your Grace?" Mrs. Hallis's voice shaking. "Is that really you?" "It's me. Come up. It's safe." They emerged slowly. Mrs. Hallis, Petra, the cook, the stable hands, everyone who'd worked in the house. They looked terrified, exhausted, like they'd been hiding for days. "What happened?" Leora asked. Mrs. Hallis looked at her, and there was something like relief in her expression. "Men came 3 days ago. Said they were creditors, here to inventory the estate's assets. But they weren't here to inventory anything. They were here to take over. They had papers, official-looking documents claiming they had legal authority to seize everything." "Who were they?" Darian demanded. "They said they represented the Whitehaven Banking Consortium. But, Your Grace, they weren't bankers. They moved like soldiers. They searched every room, asked questions about you and Lady Crow, where you'd gone, when you'd be back." Mrs. Hallis's voice dropped. "When we wouldn't tell them anything, they said they'd wait, that you'd come home eventually, and they'd be here to greet you properly. Where are they now?" "They left yesterday. Said they'd be back with reinforcements and legal authority to arrest you both for fraud and debt evasion." Leora exchanged a look with Darian. This was worse than they'd thought. Someone had orchestrated not just an assassination attempt, but a legal framework to seize the estate if that failed. "The Whitehaven Banking Consortium," she said slowly. "We don't have any outstanding loans with them." "No," Darian agreed. "We don't. Which means this is fabricated. Someone's using them as a front to legitimize theft." "Marsh," Leora said. "They have connections with the banking industry. This is their backup plan. If they can't kill us, they'll destroy us legally." Reva appeared in the doorway, one of her people beside her. "We found something you need to see." They followed her to Darian's study. The room had been torn apart, documents scattered, ledgers thrown open, the safe cracked and emptied. "They took everything," Darian said, his voice hollow. "All the records, all the proof of our debts and assets." "Not everything," Leora said. She moved to the wall, pressing on a panel that looked like solid wood. It clicked, swung open, revealing a small space behind. Darian stared. "I didn't know that was there."
I found it the first week. Your father was paranoid about creditors. He built hiding places throughout the house. She pulled out a leather case. I've been keeping copies of everything important, the real ledgers, the contracts, the evidence of what we actually owe versus what people claim we owe. She opened the case on the desk. Inside were documents that told the true story of the estate's finances, including proof that the debts the Whitehaven Banking Consortium was claiming didn't exist. This is fraud, Darian said, reading through the papers. They forged loan documents, made it look like we'd borrowed money we never touched. And if they can convince a magistrate it's legitimate, they can seize the estate legally. Leora looked at Reva. How fast can you get these documents to someone trustworthy, someone with authority who can't be bought? Depends on who you trust with authority, Reva said. The regional governor. He owes my father a favor from years ago. If I send these documents with a letter explaining the situation, he'll at least investigate before allowing a seizure. I can have them in the governor's hands by tonight, Reva said. But that still leaves you exposed here. Those men are coming back, and next time they'll have enough force to overwhelm us. Then we need to be gone before they arrive, Leora said. Run? Darian's voice was sharp. This is my estate, my home. It's a building, Leora said gently. We can lose the building and still win. But if we're here when they come back with fabricated legal authority and enough weapons to enforce it, we lose everything, including our lives. She was right, and he knew it. Darian looked around the study at the wreckage of his father's legacy, and something in his face shifted. Where do we go? He asked. Back to Harwick. We coordinate the strike against Marsh from there, use the evidence of their connection to the assassination attempt to destroy their credibility. Once they're exposed, the fabricated debt claims fall apart. And once we've won, Leora met his eyes. We come back, on our terms, with enough power and legitimacy that no one tries this again. It took less than an hour to prepare. The staff packed what they could carry, essentials and valuables. Reva's people helped load carriages, their presence the only reason this wasn't a complete disaster. Mrs. Hallis approached Leora as they were finishing. My lady, I need to apologize. For what? For underestimating you. When you first arrived, I thought you were just another noble wife, decorative and useless. I was wrong. Leora smiled despite everything. I thought the same thing about myself for a while. You're going to save this estate, aren't you? I'm going to try. They left as the sun reached its peak, a caravan of carriages and armed riders moving back toward Harwick. Leora watched the estate disappear behind them and tried not to think of it as surrender. This was strategy. This was survival. Darian sat beside her, quiet, his jaw set in that way that meant he was fighting through about 6 different emotions at once. Talk to me, Leora said. I keep thinking about my father, about how he'd rather have died than abandon the estate, even temporarily, about how his pride destroyed him. You're not him. How do you know? Because he never would have listened to me in the first place. He would have stayed, fought a battle he couldn't win, and died defending a pile of stones that don't care who owns them. She took his hand. You're choosing to live. That takes a different kind of courage. He squeezed her hand, didn't let go. The next week was chaos organized into something that looked like a plan. They established themselves in Harwick, using Reva's network to set up a base of operations that was half merchant office, half war room. The documents went to the governor with a detailed letter from Leora explaining the assassination attempt, Garrett's betrayal, and the fabricated debt scheme. The response came faster than expected. The governor sent investigators, people who couldn't be bribed or intimidated. They started asking questions in Whitehaven, following the paper trail that Leora had documented so carefully. Meanwhile, Reva's people moved against Marsh and Sons. The seizure happened at dawn, coordinated and brutal in its efficiency. Reva's crew boarded the merchant ship as it docked, overwhelmed the guards before they could mount a defense, and took control of the entire cargo. By noon, they had everything inventoried, documented, and ready for exposure. Leora had arranged for representatives from 3 different newspapers to be present. She stood on the docks with the seized cargo behind her and Reva beside her, facing a crowd of journalists, merchants, and curious onlookers. My name is Leora Crow, she said. her voice carrying across the crowd. And I'm here to tell you about corruption that's been poisoning trade in these ports for over a decade. She laid it out piece by piece. Marsh & Sons price fixing, their bribes to port officials, their monopolistic practices that had driven honest merchants out of business. She showed them the evidence, documents that prove systematic fraud, witness statements from people Reva's network had convinced to talk. And when my husband and I tried to negotiate fair contracts with other suppliers, Leora continued, Marsh & Sons hired assassins to kill us. They conspired with a corrupt estate manager to betray our trust, and when that failed, they forged debt documents to steal our property legally. A reporter raised his hand. You're accusing one of the most established merchant houses in the region of attempted murder. That's a serious claim. It's a serious crime, Leora said, and I have serious evidence. She handed over copies of everything, the attack, the forged documents, the connections between Marsh and the fake creditors. The reporters took them, questions already forming, the smell of scandal sharp in the air. What about this cargo? Another reporter asked, gesturing to the seized goods. This cargo will be sold at fair market value, Leora said. Every penny will go toward establishing a merchant cooperative that operates on transparent pricing and ethical practices. We're done letting corruption hide behind respectability. The crowd murmured. Leora could see merchants calculating, officials looking nervous, the kind of shift that happened when people realized the game had changed. Reva stepped forward. And just so we're clear, anyone else thinking about coming after Duke and Duchess Crow will have to go through us. We're not pirates anymore. We're privateers operating under legal authority, and we take our contracts seriously. That was the moment it hit the crowd. The realization that the notorious Red Hands had just legitimized themselves by siding with a duke and his merchant wife against established power. The balance of the entire Northern trade network had just shifted. The newspapers ran the story that night. By morning, it was spreading through every port city in the region. Marsh & Sons tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. The governor's investigators raided their offices, found more proof of corruption, and within 3 days, the company's leadership was under arrest. The fabricated debt scheme collapsed. The Whitehaven Banking Consortium quietly withdrew their claims, probably realizing that their connection to Marsh was about to destroy them too. And Garrett was found trying to board a ship to the southern colonies. Reva's people brought him back in chains. Leora watched them drag him into the warehouse they'd been using as headquarters. He looked smaller than she remembered, hollowed out by fear and whatever guilt he might be capable of feeling. Why? Darian asked him. No preamble, no ceremony, just the question. Garrett wouldn't meet his eyes. They said you were going to fail anyway, that the estate was already lost. They offered me a way to survive the collapse with something to show for my years of service. You could have asked me for help, Darian said. You could have told me you were afraid. You weren't listening to anyone. You were drowning and pulling everyone down with you. Garrett finally looked up. I was trying to save myself by selling us out to people who wanted us dead. I didn't know they'd try to kill you. I swear I didn't know. Leora stepped forward. What did you think would happen? You gave them our route, our timing, everything they needed to attack us. Did you think they were going to have a polite conversation? Garrett had no answer. Turn him over to the governor's people, Darian said finally. Let him answer for what he did in front of a magistrate. They took him away. Leora watched him go and felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just the cold satisfaction of seeing a threat neutralized. It's done, Reva said, appearing beside them. Marsh is finished, the fake debts are exposed, and your friend gets to explain himself to someone with legal authority. You won. For now, Leora said. You're never satisfied, are you? I'm satisfied when we're home, when the estate is secure and no one's trying to kill us. She looked at Reva. Thank you for all of this, for taking the risk. You gave us legitimacy, Reva said. That's worth more than gold in our world. The contract stands. 4 months, guaranteed passage, and we're both better off than we were. They shook hands, and Leora thought about how strange it was that she trusted a former pirate more than she'd ever trusted most legitimate merchants. The word came 3 days later. The governor had cleared them of all fraudulent debt claims and issued warrants for everyone involved in the scheme. The estate was theirs again, legally and completely. They made the journey back in daylight this time. No fear of ambush, no desperate race against death. Just a duke and his wife returning to claim what was theirs. The staff had returned before them, had cleaned and repaired what they could. The estate still looked tired, still showed the scars of years of decline, but it was theirs. And this time, they had the resources and knowledge to fix it. Mrs. Hallis met them at the entrance. "Welcome home, Your Grace, my lady." Leora smiled at the title. She'd earned it now, in ways that had nothing to do with marriage contracts. That night, after the staff had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Leora and Darian stood in the study, the room where this had all started, where she'd first offered to help and he'd dismissed her. "I need to say something," Darian said. "All right. I was wrong about everything, about you, about what this marriage was, about what I needed to survive." He turned to face her. "You saved me. Not just the estate, but me. You forced me to see that strength isn't about maintaining appearances. It's about being willing to change, to trust, to let someone else be stronger than you when you can't be." Leora felt her throat tighten. "I didn't do it alone." "No, but you did it first. You walked into that warehouse. You negotiated with Reva. You pushed me to stop drowning." He reached for her hand. "I married you for money, but I'm staying married to you because I can't imagine surviving anything without you now." "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." "Really?" "Well, my father once told me I had good instincts for contract law, but this is close." Darian laughed, and the sound was real and warm and completely unexpected. They stood together in the study, surrounded by ledgers and documents that told the story of their victory, and Leora thought about how far they'd come from that rain-soaked chapel. How much had changed, how much they'd changed each other. "What now?" Darian asked. "Now we rebuild, properly this time, with Reva's route secured, with honest contracts, with people we can trust." She looked at him. "And maybe we try being actual partners instead of strangers sharing a title." "I'd like that." Outside, the estate grounds stretched into darkness, no longer looking abandoned but waiting. Waiting for what they'd make of it, for the future they'd build from the wreckage of the past. They'd survived the worst. Now they'd see if they could manage the harder part, actually thriving. The first month back was harder than the fighting had been. Rebuilding required a different kind of strength. The patience to fix things that had been broken for years, the discipline to maintain progress when nothing dramatic was happening, the willingness to trust people who'd watched them nearly lose everything. Leora threw herself into it with the same intensity she'd brought to negotiating with Reva. She reorganized the entire supply chain, cutting out middlemen who'd been profiting from Darian's ignorance, establishing direct contracts with producers who could offer better prices. She brought in an independent accountant to audit every transaction from the past 5 years, rooting out the small corruptions that had bled the estate dry. Darian worked beside her, learning systems he should have understood years ago. He met with tenant farmers personally, listened to their complaints about outdated equipment and unfair rent structures, and started making changes that were long overdue. It was humbling work, admitting to people he'd failed them, but he did it anyway. "You're getting better at this," Leora said one evening, reviewing contracts in the study. Darian looked up from the ledger he'd been struggling with. "At what? Basic arithmetic?" "At listening. At admitting when you don't know something." She set down her pen. "At being a partner instead of a lord." "I had a good teacher." "You had desperation. I just pointed you in the right direction." The estate began to stabilize, slowly, grudgingly, like a patient who'd been sick so long they'd forgotten what health felt like. Fields that had been left fallow were replanted. Equipment was repaired. Wages were paid on time, fully, without the usual excuses. And the northern shipping route, now secured by Reva's people, started generating actual profit. The first payment came through 6 weeks after they'd returned. 4,000 going out to Reva's crew, but 6,000 coming back from successful shipments that no longer had to account for seized cargo and ransom vessels. The math was simple and beautiful. "We're making money," Darian said, staring at the numbers like they might disappear. "We're making sustainable money," Leora corrected. "There's a difference." She was right. This wasn't the boom and bust cycle his father had relied on, the desperate borrowing to cover bad years and reckless spending during good ones. This was steady, predictable, the kind of foundation you could actually build on. But not everyone was happy about their resurrection. The creditors who'd been circling the estate, waiting for the final collapse so they could pick over the remains, found themselves suddenly irrelevant. The Crow estate was paying its debts on schedule, renegotiating terms from a position of actual leverage rather than desperation. Some accepted it, others didn't. Lord Pemberton arrived on a cold morning in early autumn, his carriage bearing the crest of one of the oldest merchant banking families in the region. Leora watched from the window as he climbed out, his movements precise and calculated. A man who'd never had to struggle for anything. "He's here about the loan," Darian said, coming to stand beside her. "I know." Pemberton held the largest remaining debt against the estate, $15,000, borrowed 3 years ago when Darian's father was still alive and still pretending everything was fine. The interest had been crushing, the terms designed to ensure the debt could never actually be repaid. Leora had other plans. They received Pemberton in the formal drawing room, the one that still looked impressive if you didn't look too closely at the worn upholstery and faded curtains. Mrs. Hallis served tea with the kind of cold professionalism that suggested she knew exactly why this man was here. "Duke Crow," Pemberton said, his voice smooth as oil. "And the Duchess. How lovely to see you both recovered from your ordeal." "Thank you for your concern," Darian said flatly. "I was quite surprised to hear about the attack. Highway robbery is becoming such a problem in the outer regions." Pemberton sipped his tea. "Though I understand you've made some interesting alliances since then. The Red Hands, wasn't it? Or are they calling themselves something more respectable now?" "They're privateers operating under contract," Leora said. "Perfectly legal." "Of course, though it does seem unusual for a duke to be in business with former criminals." "We're in business with whoever delivers results," Leora replied. "Respectability doesn't pay the bills." Pemberton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Speaking of bills, I'm here to discuss the outstanding loan. Given the recent instability surrounding your estate, my associates and I feel it would be prudent to accelerate the repayment schedule." "You want the full amount immediately," Darian said. "Within 30 days. Surely that's reasonable, given your newfound prosperity." Leora set down her teacup. "The contract specifies quarterly payments over 5 years. We've been making those payments on time. The contract also includes a clause allowing for early collection if the lender believes the borrower's circumstances have materially changed in a way that affects their ability to repay." Pemberton pulled out a document. "Your near death, the exposure of fraud within your household, the criminal investigation. I'd say those constitute material changes." He was trying to force them into default, call the loan early, knowing they couldn't possibly have $15,000 liquid, then seize assets when they failed to pay. It was elegant in its cruelty. Darian started to speak, but Leora touched his hand, stopping him. "You're right," she said. "Our circumstances have changed materially. We're no longer desperate, poorly managed, or willing to accept predatory terms disguised as legitimate business." She pulled out her own documents, copies of everything Pemberton had ever signed, every transaction, every communication. "These contracts were negotiated when my husband's father was dying and making terrible decisions to hide his estate's collapse. The interest rates are criminally high. The terms are designed to ensure perpetual debt. And several of the clauses, including the one you just cited, violate regional lending laws implemented 4 years ago." Pemberton's expression didn't change. "Those laws weren't retroactive." "No, but they do allow for contract renegotiation when illegal terms are discovered, and they impose penalties on lenders who knowingly enforce such terms." Leora slid the documents across the table. "I've already filed a complaint with the Regional Financial Oversight Board. They're very interested in your lending practices, especially the ones involving estates in distress." Now Pemberton's mask cracked slightly. "You're bluffing." "I'm really not. Ask Marsh and Sons how that worked out for them." The room went very quiet. Pemberton looked at the documents, then at Leora, then at Darian, who was watching his wife with something that looked like awe. "What do you want?" Pemberton asked finally. "Reasonable terms, 3% interest instead of 12, 7 years instead of 5, and an acknowledgement that the acceleration clause is void." Leora leaned back. "Or you can take your chances with the Oversight Board. I understand they're quite thorough when they investigate." Pemberton was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. 3% is unacceptable. 5. 4. 6 years. 7. This is not a negotiation, Lord Pemberton. These are the terms under which we'll continue paying you. If you refuse, we'll discharge the debt through legal channels that will take longer, cost you more, and expose practices you'd prefer to keep private. She was gambling. If Pemberton called her bluff and pushed back legally, it would tie up resources they needed elsewhere. But she'd learned from her father that the best negotiations happened when the other person believed you had nothing to lose. Pemberton signed. When he left, Darian closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. That was terrifying, he said. That was necessary. Leora gathered the documents. He'll tell others. Word will spread that we're not easy targets anymore. You've changed since that chapel.
So have you, he smiled. Yeah, I have.
The winter came early that year, and with it, the first real test of whether their changes would hold. A bad storm damaged one of the main warehouses, destroying inventory and forcing them to scramble for replacement stock. Then 2 of their best ships were delayed by weather, throwing off delivery schedules and threatening contracts. It was the kind of crisis that would have destroyed the old estate. But now they had systems in place, backup suppliers, insurance that actually covered the damages, relationships with other merchants who were willing to help because Leora had helped them first. They weathered it. Barely, but they weathered it. I'm exhausted, Darian said one night, collapsing into bed beside Leora. Is it always going to be this hard? Probably, just different kinds of hard. She turned to face him. But we're building something that lasts now. That's worth the exhaustion. Is it? You tell me. Would you rather go back to how things were, pretending everything was fine while it fell apart?
No. He pulled her closer. I just wish surviving didn't require quite so much surviving. She laughed despite herself. That's the most honest thing you've said all week. They lay there in the darkness, listening to wind rattle the windows, and Leora thought about how strange intimacy was, how it wasn't the grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but these quiet moments of shared exhaustion that actually built something real. I want to show you something, Darian said suddenly. Now? Tomorrow. I've been working on it for weeks. The next morning he led her to the eastern fields, the ones that had been too damaged to plant for years. Except they weren't damaged anymore. The land had been cleared, prepared, and planted with winter wheat that was already starting to show green shoots. You did this, Leora asked, with the tenant farmers. We worked out a profit-sharing arrangement. They provide the labor and expertise, we provide the land and equipment, and we split the yield fairly. It's not how my father did things, but he looked at her. It's how you would do it. Leora felt something catch in her chest. You learned. I'm trying to. She kissed him then, there in the middle of the field with dirt on their boots and cold wind cutting through their coats, and it felt like the first kiss that actually meant something. Not the performance at the altar, not the careful affection of people learning to coexist, but actual want and choice and partnership. When they pulled apart, Darian was smiling in a way she'd never seen before. Genuine, unguarded, the expression of someone who'd stopped carrying the weight of pretending. We're gonna make it, aren't we? He said. Yeah, we are. Spring arrived with the kind of aggressive optimism that made winter feel like a lie. The fields greened, the first shipments of the season came through flawlessly, and Reva sent word that the northern routes were the safest they'd been in a decade. Leora stood in the study one morning, reviewing the quarterly accounts, and realized they were actually profitable. Not barely surviving, not treading water, but genuinely making more than they spent. We did it, she said aloud, though no one was there to hear. Did what? Darian appeared in the doorway carrying their daughter. She was 6 months old, born the previous autumn on a night when Leora had been convinced she was going to die for entirely different reasons than assassination. They'd named her Elena, after Darian's mother, but Leora thought of her as their second chance, the proof that something built on desperation could transform into something worth protecting. We're profitable, Leora said, showing him the numbers. Actually, sustainably profitable. Darian shifted Elena to his other arm, came to look at the ledger. His eyes widened.
That's more than we've ever made. That's what happens when you stop hemorrhaging money to corruption and inefficiency. Elena made a noise, reaching for the papers. Leora intercepted her tiny hand before she could grab the ink bottle. Not yet, little one. You need to be at least 3 before you start reviewing contracts. 4, Darian said. Let her have some childhood first. 4.5. Final offer. They stood there, the 3 of them, in a study that had once represented everything that was failing about Darian's life. Now it was just a room where they worked, where they planned, where they built the future one decision at a time. I want to do something, Darian said suddenly. Something that marks this, that shows things have actually changed. Like what? I want to host a gathering. All the merchants we work with, the tenant farmers, the staff, not a formal ball or some performative display of wealth, just a celebration, an acknowledgement that we survived because they helped us survive. Leora considered it. Your father would have hated that. I know. That's how I know it's the right thing to do. They planned it for midsummer, when the first harvest would be coming in and they'd have actual results to celebrate. Invitations went out to everyone who'd played a part in the estate's resurrection, merchants who'd taken risks on new contracts, farmers who'd trusted the profit-sharing arrangement, staff who'd stayed when fleeing would have been easier, and Reva, because leaving her out would have been both rude and strategically stupid. The gathering happened on a perfect evening, warm but not too hot, with the kind of golden light that made everything look painted. They set up in the gardens, the ones that had been overgrown and wild when Leora first arrived, but were now tamed into something between formal and comfortable. People came. More than Leora had expected. They filled the garden with conversation and laughter, the sound of people who'd won something together and knew it. Reva arrived fashionably late, dressed in clothes that split the difference between pirate and privateer. She'd brought her core crew, and they looked simultaneously dangerous and delighted to be there. Nice party, Reva said, accepting a glass of wine. Very respectable. Don't get used to it, Leora said. We're still merchants at heart. Good. Respectable is boring. Reva clinked her glass against Leora's. To surviving. To more than surviving. They drank, and Leora looked around at the gathering, at Darian talking with tenant farmers like they were colleagues rather than subordinates, at Mrs. Hallis laughing with the cook, at merchants comparing notes on trade routes, at all these people who'd been strangers or enemies or obstacles and were now something closer to allies. You did this? Reva said quietly. We did this? No. You started it. You walked into my warehouse and refused to accept that losing was inevitable. You made all of us believe something different was possible. Reva paused. Your father would be proud, or terrified, probably both. Definitely both. Darian found her as the sun was setting, Elena asleep in his arms. I need to say something, he said. Publicly. Are you sure? Very. He handed Elena to Leora, then moved to the center of the garden. Someone noticed, tapped a glass, and gradually the conversation quieted. I'm not good at speeches, Darian began. My father was good at speeches. He could make failure sound like victory and convince people that maintaining appearances was the same as actual success. I can't do that, so I'm just going to tell you the truth. He looked around at the gathered crowd. 3 years ago, this estate was dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly and surely, bleeding money and purpose until there'd be nothing left. I was drowning and too proud to admit it, making the same mistakes my father made, pretending that tradition and title were enough to survive on. People were listening now, really listening. Then I married this woman, Darian continued, gesturing to Leora, and I treated her like furniture that came with a dowry. I ignored her, dismissed her, and wasted months of time we didn't have because I couldn't imagine that someone without a title might actually know more than I did. Leora felt her face heat, but she didn't look away. She saved this estate. She saved me. Not by being polite or decorative or anything else I thought a wife should be. She saved us by being brilliant, stubborn, and absolutely unwilling to watch us drown without trying everything to keep us afloat. He turned to face her directly. She negotiated with pirates. She reorganized our entire business model. She got stabbed protecting what we'd built and survived through sheer determination. She fought off creditors, exposed corruption, and forced me to see that strength isn't about never needing help. It's about being brave enough to accept it when it's offered. His voice cracked slightly. I married her for money, but I stay married to her because she's the most extraordinary person I've ever met, and because I can't imagine facing anything, good or bad, without her beside me. The garden was completely silent now. So this celebration isn't about me, Darian said, looking back at the crowd. It's about her, and about all of you who took risks, who trusted us when we'd given you no reason to, who helped us build something that actually works instead of just looks impressive. He raised his glass. To partnership. To honesty. To surviving by changing instead of dying with pride intact. People echoed the toast, glasses raised, and Leora felt tears threatening. She blinked them back, unwilling to cry in front of a garden full of merchants and pirates and farmers who'd seen her bleed but had never seen her break. Later, after the guests had left and Elena was sleeping in her nursery, Leora and Darian stood on the terrace overlooking the estate grounds. You didn't have to say all that, Leora said quietly. Yes, I did. You deserved to hear it. They deserved to hear it. He took her hand. And I needed to say it out loud, to make it real. What's real? That I love you. Not because of what you've done for the estate, but because of who you are. Fierce and brilliant and completely unwilling to accept defeat. He smiled. You terrify most people, you know that? Just most? You terrify me too, but in the best way. Leora leaned against him, looking out at land that had been dying and was now healing, at fields that would yield actual harvests, at a future that felt possible instead of inevitable collapse. We should expand, she said suddenly. What? The merchant cooperative, the one we established with the seized marsh cargo. It's working. We should expand it, bring in more ethical merchants, create an alternative to the old corrupt systems. Darian laughed. You're never satisfied, are you? I'm satisfied. But satisfaction doesn't mean stopping. It means building from a position of strength instead of desperation. What did I do to deserve you? You carried me 8 miles through a forest while I was bleeding internally. That earned you some credit. Only some? I'm keeping score. You're currently ahead, but it's close. They stood there as night settled over the estate, and Leora thought about the girl she'd been on those chapel steps. Scared, angry, feeling sold like cargo into a life she hadn't chosen. That girl had been right to be afraid, but she'd also been wrong about what strength looked like. Strength wasn't enduring in silence, it wasn't accepting your circumstances with grace. Strength was fighting back, demanding better, refusing to disappear into someone else's idea of who you should be. Strength was changing everything and calling it survival. The years that followed were good ones, though never easy. The estate thrived in ways it hadn't for generations. The merchant cooperative grew, providing fair prices and honest terms to traders who'd been exploited by the old system. Reva's crew became so respectable they eventually bought their own fleet of ships, operating as legitimate security for half the northern trade routes. Elena grew up running through fields that had once been barren, learning numbers from her mother and ethics from her father, being raised by 2 people who'd learned the hard way that partnership meant fighting for each other when it mattered. Leora never stopped working. She expanded the network her father had built, modernized it, made it something that could outlast her. She wrote contracts that other merchants used as templates. She testified before the regional governor about reforming predatory lending practices. She became the person people came to when they needed someone who understood both commerce and survival. Darian learned to lead by listening, to manage by trusting others to be competent, to measure success by sustainability rather than appearance. He never became the kind of duke his father had been, and he counted that as his greatest achievement. They fought sometimes, of course, about money, about priorities, about how to raise Elena, about whether to take risks or play it safe. But they fought as partners, not enemies, and they always came back to the same foundation. They'd survived worse together. On their 5th anniversary, Darian gave Leora a gift. It was a ledger, new and unused, with her name embossed on the cover in gold leaf. "What's this for?" she asked. "For whatever you build next. Whatever project or scheme or brilliant plan you're already thinking about, but haven't told me yet." He smiled. I know you, Leora. You're already planning something. She was. She'd been thinking about education, about establishing a school for merchants' daughters, teaching them the skills her father had taught her. But she hadn't mentioned it yet, hadn't wanted to commit before she'd worked out the details. How did you know? Because you get this look, like you're calculating odds and spotting opportunities no one else sees. He touched her face. It's the same look you had when you told me you were going to negotiate with pirates. And you let me do it. I try not to stand between you and your ambitions. I learned that lesson early. Leora kissed him, grateful and amused, and deeply, genuinely happy in a way she'd never expected to be when she climbed those rain-soaked chapel steps. I love you, she said. I know. I keep score too. You're still ahead, but I'm working on it. They stood together in the study where so much had changed, surrounded by evidence of everything they'd built, and Leora thought about legacy. Not the kind that came from title or bloodline, but the kind you forged through choice and effort and refusing to accept that losing was inevitable. Her father had built an empire through risk and ruthlessness. She was building something different, something sustainable, something that valued people over profit, something that could outlast her because it was built on principles rather than personality. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was. But it was real. And it was theirs. And it had been earned through blood and miles, and the absolute refusal to give up when giving up would have been easier. Years later, when Elena was old enough to understand, Leora told her the whole story. About the marriage that started as a transaction, about the warehouse negotiation, about the forest and the blood and the desperate miles her father had carried her because he refused to let her die. That's terrifying, Elena said. It was. But it was also the moment everything changed, when we stopped pretending and started actually fighting for something worth keeping. Do you regret it? Any of it? Leora thought about that rain-soaked chapel, about feeling sold and invisible and trapped, about the anger that had driven her to take risks no sane person would take, about nearly dying on a forest road and waking up to find Darian's hand in hers, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. No, she said finally. I don't regret it, because it taught me that the worst circumstances can become the foundation for something extraordinary if you're brave enough to change everything. What would you tell yourself if you could go back to that chapel? I'd tell myself that strength isn't enduring in silence. It's demanding better, fighting for better, refusing to disappear. Leora smiled, and I'd tell myself that the man who looks so cold and distant is actually just drowning, and if I'm brave enough to throw him a rope, he'll eventually learn to trust it. Elena absorbed this, the way she absorbed everything, carefully, thoughtfully, already calculating how to apply the lesson. I want to be like you when I grow up, she said. No, you don't. You want to be better than me, smarter, kinder, more effective. That's how progress works. Did grandmother teach you that? Your grandfather did. He taught me to never accept limitations that other people try to impose. To see the gaps in systems and exploit them. To survive by being smarter than the people trying to control you. And what did father teach you? Leora considered this. Your father taught me that pride can kill you just as surely as a knife, that asking for help isn't weakness, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you were wrong and change everything. They sat together in the library, surrounded by books and ledgers and the accumulated evidence of a life built on risk and partnership, and Leora felt the weight of legacy settling on her shoulders. Not the burden of maintaining what had been, but the responsibility of building what could be. The estate thrived. Elena grew strong and sharp and unafraid. Darian became the kind of leader his father should have been, but never could be. And Leora continued to build, to negotiate, to push against the boundaries of what was considered possible for a woman in her position. The story of the merchant's daughter who'd married a desperate duke and saved his estate became legend in trading circles. People told it different ways, some focused on the romance, others on the business acumen, still others on the sheer audacity of negotiating with pirates while the world was trying to kill her. But the truth, the real truth, was simpler and harder than any legend. It was a story about two people who'd been drowning in different ways, who'd found each other in desperation, and who'd chosen, every single day, to keep choosing each other even when it would have been easier not to. It was a story about survival that became partnership that became love, and it was a story about understanding that legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you build with your own hands, even when those hands are bloody and shaking and you're terrified it's all going to fall apart. On their 10th anniversary, Leora and Darian stood on the same terrace where they'd stood so many times before, watching the sun set over fields that had been barren and were now golden with wheat. "Do you ever think about that forest?" Darian asked quietly. "About carrying you through the dark?" "Sometimes, usually when I'm facing something difficult and need to remember what actual crisis feels like." "You use our near-death experience as a calibration tool?" "Don't you?" He laughed. "Fair point." They were quiet for a moment, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of actually knowing someone. "I'm glad you didn't die," Darian said finally. "Me too. And I'm glad you married me, even though I was terrible at the beginning." "You weren't terrible. You were drowning and lashing out. There's a difference. You're very generous in your retrospective. I'm honest in my retrospective. You were a disaster, but you learned. That's what matters." Elena appeared in the doorway, 16 now, and frighteningly competent. "Mother, the new contracts from the Southern merchants arrived. You wanted to review them before dinner." "I'll be right there." Elena disappeared back inside. Leora started to follow, then turned back to Darian. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For carrying me 8 miles, for listening when you didn't want to, for changing when changing was the hardest thing you'd ever done." She took his hand. "For building this with me." Darian pulled her close, kissed her temple. "Thank you for refusing to let me drown, for being terrifying in all the best ways, for showing me what strength actually looks like." They stood there as the light faded. Two people who'd started as a transaction and become something that couldn't be reduced to contracts or convenience. Two people who'd survived by changing everything and called it love. In the distance, the fields stretched toward the horizon, golden and green, and full of the kind of promise that only came from hard work and honest effort. The estate that had been dying was now thriving. The marriage that had been hollow was now real. And the legacy they were building, together with blood and miles and absolute refusal to give up, would outlast them both. Because in the end, that's what survival meant. Not just enduring, but transforming. Not just living through the worst, but building something beautiful from the wreckage. They'd done that, against every odd, against every expectation, against a world that had tried to break them. They'd done that together. And that, Leora thought, as she walked back inside to review contracts with her daughter, was a legacy worth leaving.